The central spire of the grand conclave of Xylos seemed to drink the ambient starlight, its crystalline facets absorbing the deep violet emanations of the system's binary suns, redirecting the light into the cavernous assembly hall in agonizingly slow, deliberate shafts that illuminated the tiers of seated delegates. The air, recycled and scented with ozone and the metallic tang of fear, vibrated subtly with the collective psychic output of 1,000 governing bodies, a suffocating blanket of anxiety that pressed down even upon the most hardened politicians of the Cathar hegemony. At the apex of the tiered seating, where the prime luminar of the hegemony sat enthroned upon a structure carved from petrified spacetime, the silence had stretched taut, resonating like a struck ancient bell. Sensor readings, displayed as swirling, complex holograms above the central dais, showed the impossible. A single, utterly insignificant vessel, designated by their early, dismissive classification as a scout class tertiary priority, had breached the established defensive cordon of the Uit Nebula, a region considered impenetrable by all recognized conventional and non-conventional metrics of interstellar warfare. This was not a localized incursion. This was an insult carved into the very fabric of their meticulous security architecture. Prime Luminar Vorth, his multifaceted eyes, the color of oxidized copper, flickering with agitation that he struggled to suppress beneath the mantle of stoic authority, slowly extended a 3-digit manipulator towards the holographic display. The representation of the human vessel, rendered in the harsh, utilitarian geometry the Cathar analysts insisted upon, looked pitifully small, a shard of blackened metal against the velvet expanse of void. The designation remains Unidentified Threat Vector Gamma-7, Vorth's voice echoed, synthesized and amplified to carry the weight of the hegemony itself. Yet underneath, the tremor of political vulnerability was detectable by those sensitive enough to listen. Its propulsion signature is erratic, inefficient, yet it bypassed the gravimetric dampeners placed at the etheric threshold. Explain this anomaly, Chief Strategos Tyler. Your department guaranteed the integrity of the threshold for the next 3 millennia. Strategos Tyler, a creature of rigid angular chitin and the perpetual grimace of a commander who had never known true failure until this cycle, shifted his weight on the obsidian floor. The gesture was minute, yet in the charged silence of the conclave, it was thunderous. Luminar, the initial analysis suggested a controlled dimensional slip, perhaps a localized, uncontrolled warp fracture caused by deep space phenomena. However, the vessel's subsequent trajectory correction, a brute force maneuver that should have reduced its internal components to plasma, indicates deliberate control. They are not hiding their passage, they are mocking it. They slice through our finest predictive matrices like silk. Tyler paused, allowing the accusation implicit in his tone to settle heavily upon the shoulders of the engineers and tactical specialists arrayed below him. The vessel transmits nothing intelligible on any recognized frequency band. No power signature beyond the minimal required for life support and limited maneuvering thrusters. It is, by all metrics of sophisticated interstellar physics, adrift. Yet it moves with purpose toward the central system. A delegate from the Volarian Directorate, a species known for their obsessive adherence to codified law and their deep suspicion of kinetic weaponry, projected a wave of agitated, highly focused thought into the shared mental space of the assembly. Purpose. A derelict exhibiting programmed drift. We must quarantine the sector immediately. Any entity capable of breaching the threshold, regardless of its current apparent technological stature, represents a vector for existential contagion. Prudence demands immediate obliteration. Fire the tertiary deterrents. Erase the anomaly before it propagates a concept we cannot contain. Vorth dismissed the Volarian suggestion with a barely perceptible tilt of his crystalline head, a gesture that contained volumes of political dismissal. Obliteration is the strategy of the panicked, Director, and the strategy of the wasteful. This vessel has crossed over 300 standard sectors of unclaimed space, ignoring all established neutral zones, ignoring all established hegemony deterrent signals, and has positioned itself within intercept range of our primary informational relay network. Destruction now yields only wreckage, yielding no knowledge. We require comprehension. He turned his gaze to the human representation on the display, the crude, blocky silhouette mocking the elegance of Cathar design. What manner of species utilizes such primitive, robust engineering? Their energy profile suggests technologies millennia behind our own Basel. In manufacturing standards, they are illogical in their approach. Illogical, perhaps luminar, but effective, countered a representative of the Silix collective, a race whose strength lay in nonlinear computation and probabilistic modeling. Their energy signatures are erratic precisely because they utilize antiquated reaction drives that vent massive amounts of waste heat in bursts, a sign of inferior containment fields. Yet their trajectory stabilization utilizes an algorithm we cannot parse. It appears to be based on continuous moment-to-moment recalculation against external gravitational distortions, rather than predictive mapping. It is reactive, not proactive. They are driving by looking directly at the immediate obstacle, an absurdly high-risk strategy unless they perceive the environment with far greater fidelity than our long-range sensors permit. This introspection introduced the first true fissure of doubt into the hegemony's arrogant assessment. The Cathar relied on vast, predictive sensor nets. The idea that an opponent might simply see better in a fundamental way was profoundly unsettling. The debate devolved into a cacophony of psychic projections and synthesized voices, a storm of accusation and counter-accusation regarding security failures, technological stagnation, and the political ramifications of allowing a perceived minor power to reach the doorstep of the hegemony. The political ecosystem of Xylos thrived on stability, and this single, silent ship represented an intolerable variable. Vorth allowed the chaos to wash over the hall for a calculated duration, maximizing the psychological pressure on his subordinates, before interjecting with a soundless command that nonetheless imposed immediate, absolute silence. Enough, the philosophical underpinnings of their engineering are secondary to the present tactical reality. The vessel approaches the perimeter of the third orbital defense grid. Strategos Tyler, you will dispatch a diplomatic escort, reinforced by a single rapid interdiction cruiser. Approach the vessel with full shields, minimal aggressive posture. We will attempt first contact using the standard Galactic concordance package, translated into whatever crude linguistic matrix they might possess. Vorth leaned forward, the crystalline throne catching the light, rendering his silhouette majestic and terrifying. If they respond with hostile intent, the interdiction cruiser is authorized to disable, not destroy. We must bring the mechanism back intact for study. The tension in the conclave reached an unbearable pitch. To disable a vessel capable of breaching the threshold without immediate, overwhelming force felt like an act of profound weakness, a concession that the Cathar hegemony might be vulnerable. Yet, the Prime Luminar had spoken, and the logic, however uncomfortable, was undeniable. Knowledge was the ultimate currency. The decision was ratified by the sheer, paralyzing weight of Vorth's authority, and the delegates watched the holographic projection, the tiny speck of human defiance shrinking slightly as it entered the effective range of the hegemony's most powerful local defense installations. The rapid interdiction cruiser Vindicator's Scythe, a behemoth bristling with energy projectors and layered defensive matrices, moved with the grace expected of a flagship built by the hegemony's finest shipyards. It approached the human vessel, maintaining a precise, respectful distance calculated to convey power without immediate threat. The escort vessels, smaller, faster patrol craft, formed a loose cordon around the anomaly. On the bridge of the Vindicator's Scythe, Captain Zarthrax, a seasoned veteran whose reputation for unflinching adherence to protocol was legendary, felt a cold dread that belied his species, reputed emotional control. He watched the silent, unresponsive ship on his main view screen. The human vessel was a testament to austerity, devoid of intricate sensor arrays, lacking the redundant power conduits essential for any sustained interstellar operation. It appeared to be held together by sheer defiance rather than sophisticated metallurgy. Maintain energy-dampening protocols, Zarthrax transmitted mentally to his bridge crew, his focus absolute. Do not allow any residual emissions to skew their passive readings. Initiate concordance package transmission sequence, standard broadcast protocol, level 3 power saturation. We await their response. The concordance package, a carefully curated library of galactic history, mathematics, basic ethics, and universal constants, flooded the void between the ships. It was the hegemony's gentle knock on the door of the unknown, rendered in symbols and universal acoustic patterns. Silence followed. Not the silence of inaction, but a deep, pregnant void where response should have been. Seconds stretched into what felt like epochs, the patrol craft growing restless, their automated systems cycling. High-frequency diagnostic pings that bounced harmlessly off the human hull. Then the human vessel responded. It did not use the hegemony's meticulously crafted package. It did not send back complex mathematics or philosophical inquiries. Instead, a single, coherent signal pierced the noise, not a transmission of data, but a focused burst of electromagnetic energy directed precisely at the Vindicator's scythe. It bypassed the complex communication arrays, overriding the primary receivers, and spoke directly, albeit crudely, into the ship's environmental monitoring systems, translating itself instantaneously into the common Cathar trade tongue, a language known for its blunt utilitarianism. We acknowledge your proximity, identify intentions, we are navigating under duress. Request immediate safe passage clearance past grid line Delta 9. The voice that emerged was flat, synthesized, devoid of inflection, yet possessing an undeniable quality of absolute control. It was the sound of a machine that had been given a single, overriding objective and was executing it without deviation, regardless of the surrounding environment or the titanic power array observing it. On the bridge of the Vindicator's scythe, Captain Zarthrax involuntarily recoiled. The sheer audacity of the demand, transmitted while under the direct observation of the hegemony's finest military hardware, was staggering. He activated his external comms, projecting his voice, modulated for maximum comm, into the void. Vessel designated Gamma 7, you are operating within restricted sovereign space of the Cathar hegemony. State your origin and purpose. Unilateral transit without prior notification is an act of aggressive trespass. The response was immediate, cutting through Zarthrax's measured projection as if it were static. Origin designation, Sol System Earth. Purpose, urgent resource relocation under established quarantine violation parameters. We require passage. Failure to clear grid line Delta 9 within standard metric cycle will be interpreted as actionable impedance. The political fallout in the Grand Conclave, where the delegates watched the slow-motion drama unfold via high-speed encrypted relays, was instantaneous and explosive. Actionable impedance. The terminology itself was a weapon, suggesting a pre-calculated threshold of acceptable interference, as if the humans had mapped the hegemony's rules of engagement and were now navigating precisely between the lines. Prime Luminar Vorth, witnessing the transcript of the exchange, felt a new, colder pressure settle around his core organs. This was not the behavior of a fledgling, primitive race struggling for survival. This was the calculation of a species that valued its objective above all perceived threats. Their origin, Vorth commanded, his voice now imbued with a dangerous stillness. Cross-reference their designation against the ancient, forgotten databases, the Sol system. I recall fragmented historical notations regarding that sector, long before the unification treaties. Strategos Tyler, already working feverishly, projected his findings. Luminar, the Sol system is listed in pre-epic archives as a Class 4 quarantine zone, established by the first Great Concordance millennia ago, citing biological volatility and extreme species unpredictability. It was sealed, not because of technological threat, but because of inherent unreliability in their sociological development. They were deemed too chaotic for stable inclusion in the galactic community. Chaos, predictability, reliability, Vorth murmured, the words tasting metallic on his sensory nodes. They have crossed galactic barriers, defied our layered defenses, and now demand passage based on pre-existing, forgotten mandates. This speaks not of weakness, but of an absolute, unwavering adherence to a specific set of self-defined laws. Strategos, elevate the interdiction cruiser to maximum defensive posture. Send a formal, non-negotiable demand for immediate surrender and boarding rights. If they refuse, neutralize their propulsion systems. We will not tolerate ultimatum. On the bridge of the Vindicator's scythe, Captain Zarthrax braced himself. The tension was palpable. The patrol craft were whining in high alert, their weapon conduits humming with stored energy. He transmitted the hegemony's final declaration of terms. The reply from the human vessel was almost instantaneous, and it was not a refusal nor an aggressive declaration. It was an astonishing, calm counteroffer. Impedance recognized. We cannot divert course to accommodate your jurisdictional claims. The cargo we transport is time-sensitive and of catastrophic consequence should it be delayed beyond the established window. We propose a compromise for immediate transit clearance. A single hegemony science vessel, escorted by 2 diplomatic vessels, may approach our location. We will transmit a limited data packet detailing the nature of our cargo and the required mitigation protocol. You may observe our passage under strictly controlled conditions. We will comply with all non-intrusive observational parameters. Refusal to engage in negotiated, controlled observation constitutes impedance. This was a tactical masterpiece of diplomatic maneuvering. The humans had acknowledged the hegemony's power by offering observation, yet retained absolute control over their own actions by dictating the terms of engagement and refusing to surrender. They framed their entire operation not as a confrontation, but as an urgent logistical necessity that outweighed the hegemony's territorial claims. They were treating the hegemony not as a sovereign power to be feared, but as a large, cumbersome obstacle to be managed. Vorth watched this exchange unfold on the massive projection screen in the conclave hall, his carefully cultivated political composure finally fracturing. He slammed a manipulator onto the armrest of his throne. The sound of pressurized crystal cracking echoed through the vast chamber. They negotiate terms with the hegemon, they impose conditions, deploy the boarding teams, overrule Captain Zarthrax. We will take the vessel by force now. Strategos Tyler reacted instantly, projecting a countercommand, overriding the Prime Luminar's emotional outburst based on existing emergency protocols designed to prevent rash decisions during high-stakes first contact. Luminar, the protocol mandates immediate tactical restraint if the perceived threat level exceeds level 3 escalation without achieving immediate military parity. Their ability to bypass the threshold indicates parity, or at least tactical surprise. Forcing immediate conflict validates their premise that we are obstructionist. We must observe the data packet. If the cargo is truly catastrophic, destruction of the vessel might unleash what they are attempting to contain. The fear of the unknown weapon, the why behind the urgency, was suddenly a more potent constraint than wounded pride. Vorth hesitated, the silence stretching again as he wrestled with his political survival against the survival of the hegemony itself. Very well, Vorth hissed, the decision a concession wrung from the deepest part of his strategic core. Authorize the deployment of the science vessel Iquitas, escorted by 2 diplomatic monitors. They will approach under full sensory lockdown. If the humans violate the terms of observation, the Vindicator's scythe is authorized to execute disabling protocol, regardless of the consequences. The human vessel, which the Cathar database had identified only by its internal call sign Odyssey, ceased its forward motion approximately 3,000 kilometers from the hegemony's primary sensor demarcation line. It simply hung there, silent, waiting for the hegemony's response team. The Iquitas, a vessel dedicated entirely to non-combat research, advanced slowly, accompanied by the 2 smaller, heavily shielded diplomatic craft. The approach was meticulous, agonizingly slow, every meter covered under the scrutiny of sensors designed to map quantum fluctuations. Captain Zarthrax watched from the bridge of the Vindicator's scythe, his own command maintaining a static, ready position. He felt the weight of the hegemony's gaze upon him, a billion potential casualties if he misjudged the human intent. As the Iquitas closed to within 1,000 kilometers, the Odyssey pulsed once, a controlled emission that flooded the receivers of the 3 approaching ships. It was the data packet. It was not transmitted as a continuous stream, but as a series of discrete, hypercompressed informational bursts, overlaid with complex temporal markers indicating the precise moment each segment must be processed. The lead scientist aboard the Iquitas, Dr. Serral, a specialist in xenolinguistics and deep-time physics, immediately began routing the data through the ship's primary analytical engines. The initial processing was slow, the human data structure being profoundly alien to hegemony standards, lacking the inherent redundancies and organizational matrices they relied upon. But as the layers peeled back, Serral's internal composure began to unravel. "Report, Dr. Serral," Zarthrax demanded, his mental projection sharp. Serral's mental response was laced with sheer disbelief. "Captain, the data, it is not a weapon schematic. It is a chronometric signature, overlaid with astronomical coordinates and an extraordinarily detailed cosmological map. The coordinates point to an area far beyond the known boundaries of this galactic cluster, a region we designated as the Quiet Void, due to its lack of observable, organized energy signatures." "And the cargo?" Zarthrax pressed. "The cargo, Captain, appears to be a localized, contained temporal distortion, a small, self-sustaining bubble of highly advanced reality folding. They are not smuggling goods, they are smuggling a piece of the future. The data specifies that E-temporal field degrades rapidly in this local spacetime topology. They need to cross this sector to reach a specific insertion point, or the distortion collapses, releasing an entropic cascade that would render this entire stellar neighborhood unstable for 10,000 years. The concept was simultaneously terrifying and breathtakingly elegant. The humans were not an invading force. They were galactic emergency responders operating under an impossible timetable. They were using technology so advanced, the manipulation of localized spacetime itself, that they had to use archaic propulsion methods merely to remain controllable. On the bridge of the Odyssey, the human captain, a figure designated only as Commander Eva Rostova in the data packet, monitored the slow approach of the Hegemony science vessel. Her voice, transmitted over a secure, direct link established by the data exchange, was quiet but firm. Hegemony science vessel Iquitas, confirm receipt of hazard profile Gamma Omega and insertion coordinates. We are entering the transit phase now. You have 10 standard minutes to observe and vacate the designated corridor. We will not engage unless you actively interfere with our primary thrust vector. In the Grand Conclave, the information crashed through the assembled delegates like a physical shockwave. The arrogance they perceived was revealed to be absolute, terrifying necessity. They were facing not an aggressor, but a force of nature moving with focused intent. Prime Luminar Vorth stared at the projections showing the human ship now engaging its main thrusters. The vessel did not roar into motion. Instead, the space around it seemed to harden, and the small ship simply moved, slipping through the local spacetime fabric with unnerving ease, leaving behind a faint, shimmering wake that defied Cathar sensor physics. They are ignoring the grid line Delta 9 entirely, Vorth breathed, a rare flicker of awe mingling with the political dread. They are not circumventing it, they are redefining the space through which they travel. Strategos Tyler, what is the fastest route for the Vindicator's scythe to reach their predicted insertion point? Tyler, recovering with professional speed, ran the projections. Luminar, if we utilize a controlled warp transit now, we can intercept them near the edge of the regulated zone, approximately 4 hours from their current velocity. However, entering the projected field of their temporal containment envelope, even passively, risks synchronization failure across our primary navigation systems. Synchronization failure, Vorth demanded. Explain. Their temporal mechanics are inconsistent with our understanding of causality. If our navigation arrays attempt to calculate their position relative to standard space, the resulting differential stress could lead to critical system failure across the immediate fleet structure. We would be blind, functionally crippled, while they pass through. The choice was stark. Allow the potentially catastrophic time anomaly to pass unmonitored, or risk crippling the hegemony's immediate defensive posture to observe the phenomenon. Vorth made his decision, the political capital expended today ensuring a brutal reckoning later, but prioritizing survival now. Allow the transit. Deploy passive monitoring arrays only. Divert all computational power to modeling the potential entropic release signature described in their data. We will not interfere with the Odyssey's passage. The next 4 hours were the longest in the history of the hegemony's diplomatic tenure. The small human vessel, emitting only the faintest, non-intrusive energy signature, moved across the hegemony's carefully mapped space like a needle threading a tapestry without disturbing a single fiber. The Cathar watched, humbled, as the vessel performed precise, infinitesimal course corrections that kept it perfectly aligned with its predetermined vector, a vector that seemed to exist outside their established map of reality. As the Odyssey neared the edge of the Cathar-controlled volume, Commander Rostova transmitted a final, brief message. Transit complete. We apologize for the imposition. Our timeline is non-negotiable. We leave behind the observational data stream for your analysis. Do not pursue. Then, with a final, silent expenditure of controlled energy, the human ship vanished. It did not engage in a warp jump, nor a dimensional slip. It simply ceased to be detectable by any of the hegemony's sophisticated sensors, having executed a transition into whatever reality domain sustained its mission. The immediate aftermath in the Grand Conclave was one of profound disorientation. The tension had evaporated, replaced by a vacuum of uncertainty. Prime Luminar Vorth, returning to the conclave hall after the human vessel had disappeared, addressed the stunned delegates. The silence was now one of contemplation, not fear. They moved with the certainty of a preordained even. Vorth stated, his voice devoid of anger, replaced by a philosophical gravity. They did not seek battle, they sought passage. They demonstrated complete control over their mission parameters and an understanding of interstellar physics that renders our current understanding rudimentary. We underestimated them by evaluating them against our own metrics of power projection. They do not value conventional warfare, they value completion. Strategos Tyler, projecting his report with newly earned sobriety, confirmed the findings. Luminar, the data they left, the hazard profile Gamma Omega, it details a fundamental instability within the structure of the local supercluster, stemming from an ancient, failed attempt at manipulating cosmic constants. It suggests that our entire reality is built upon a temporary, unstable foundation laid down by a preceding, forgotten civilization. The human vessel was not saving itself. It was stabilizing a necessary component of universal structure. The Volarian delegate projected a thought, tentative and weak. If they possess the technology to manipulate spacetime to such a degree, to carry a self-contained temporal anchor, why do they rely on such archaic, visually crude hulls? Why do they project an image of limited capability? Cyril, brought directly from the Iquitas via secure telepresence, offered the chilling interpretation. Because, Director, their power is not in what they display, but in what they choose not to display. Their vessel, the Odyssey, is a perfect decoy. It uses inefficient, observable propulsion to mask the true source of its traversal capability. If they showed us their real drive signature, we would have reacted with overwhelming force, precisely as planned. They navigated the political landscape as precisely as they navigated the gravitational fields. They presented a threat level we would confront, but a solution we could not ignore. Vorth absorbed this, recognizing the profound ethical implications. The humans had willingly embraced the appearance of vulnerability to manipulate the political landscape into granting them access. They were logical, ethical within the context of their mission, and utterly ruthless in achieving their stated goal. They possess the superior strategic viewpoint, Vorth conceded. They are not seeking conquest, they are seeking equilibrium, and they achieved it by exploiting our own arrogance. The focus immediately shifted. The hegemony now possessed fragments of data concerning a reality-scale threat, the instability that the humans were apparently correcting, and knowledge of a species capable of operating outside the established laws of physics as understood by the established powers. What is the fate of this Sol system? Vorth asked, turning to the ancient archives again. If they are so pivotal to cosmic stability, why were they quarantined? The chief archivist projected the final, grim notation from the first Great Concordance regarding Earth. The quarantine was enacted not because of external threat, but internal threat. The records state that the inhabitants of Sol were prone to cycles of extreme technological advancement, immediately followed by catastrophic self-destruction. They solved fundamental problems, like manipulating causality, but were deemed too volatile to be trusted with the knowledge long-term. The quarantine was enacted to give them time to mature beyond their self-destructive tendencies. A terrible realization settled over the assembly. The humans had matured, but they had done so entirely in isolation, developing a pathway to power the hegemony could only dream of, driven by internal pressure and external isolation. They escaped the quarantine, Vorth whispered, the magnitude of the political error crashing down. They have solved the problem of controlled self-destruction, and now they operate on a timescale we cannot predict. The immediate crisis was averted, but the larger geopolitical balance had shattered. The hegemony, predicated on its technological and political supremacy, had just been outmaneuvered by a single, small vessel from a quarantined, primitive world. Vorth initiated a new command structure, moving away from punitive measures toward urgent acquisition of knowledge. Strategos Tyler, immediately divert all resources to replicating the Odyssey's observational parameters. We must understand their energy venting, their attitude control, and their localized temporal metrics. We need to understand why they left that specific, vulnerable hull structure for this mission. As the Cathar scrambled to decipher the complex, seemingly contradictory human data, advanced physics masked by rudimentary engineering, a secondary, far more unsettling element of the data packet began to resolve itself within the Iquitas' processors. Dr. Cyril initiated the final decryption sequence on a heavily encrypted segment flagged non-essential contextual data. This final layer was not physics or THR. EAT assessment. It was a recording, a communication intended for whomever intercepted the packet, framed as a concluding statement regarding the success of their mission. The synthesized voice of Commander Rostova returned, not with the clipped urgency of the approach, but with a tone of weary resolution. To the governing body observing this transit, we apologize for the necessary intrusion. The stabilization efforts were successful. The entropic cascade has been averted at this nodal point, ensuring the continuance of the local reality for the foreseeable future. We understand that our methods appear chaotic, given our appearance. This appearance is deliberate. We require the capability to move swiftly and unnoticed across known controlled territories. If we had arrived utilizing advanced drives, we would have been immediately flagged by the primary threat actors operating beyond the galactic rim, the entity we are currently attempting to avoid. A collective gasp rippled through the Cathar observers. They were not the threat. They were a bureaucracy that needed to be navigated. Rostova continued, the message deepening into a profound confession. We are not the apex of galactic power. We are the immune response. The entity we seek to evade utilizes quantum entanglement for instantaneous surveillance across vast distances. They detect any vessel utilizing coherent field dynamics or advanced predictive drives. Our only pathway through monitored space is to mimic the signature of a lower-tier chaotic species, a signature you categorized as unreliable and therefore unworthy of sustained attention. Our primitive external shell is our best shield. The sheer depth of planning involved was staggering. The humans had mapped not only the laws of physics in this sector, but the political psychology of its dominant power, the Cathar hegemony, and used that political structure as a camouflage layer. We detected the ancient quarantine protocols established by the First Concordance, Rostova concluded. We respect the spirit of that precaution, even if we resent its premise. We do not seek alliance, nor governance, nor integration. We seek only the continued freedom to respond to the emerging cosmic threats that actively seek to dismantle structured reality. We have delivered the stabilization component. Our mission parameters now dictate the pursuit of the source of the instability, a signal that has just begun to broadcast from beyond the known structure of the galaxy. Our next jump vector is a direct intercept toward the source signature. The final transmission ended, leaving behind only the echo of the final, devastating piece of information, the source signal. Prime Luminar Vorth stood motionless, the cracking of his throne armrest a painful memory in the sudden, overwhelming clarity. The Cathar hegemony, the undisputed masters of this quadrant, had just been relegated to the role of unwitting, high-level sensor coverage for a species that viewed them as a predictable, manageable obstacle. The true frontier was not the contested space between empires, but the unknown void beyond the established consensus of reality itself. The First Concordance, Vorth said, his voice now hollow, projecting across the vast, silent hall, did not quarantine the humans out of fear of their power, but out of fear of their focus. They saw the inherent danger in a species that places absolute, unyielding priority on a singular objective, regardless of collateral political damage or self-imposed limitations. He looked at Strategos Tyler, the political map of the galaxy irrevocably redrawn in that single encounter. We spent millennia building walls against rivals and lesser powers. We never factored in a force that would utilize our own stability against us, one that operates on the timescale of cosmic decay, not political cycle. The immediate threat was gone, replaced by a profound philosophical challenge to the hegemony's entire worldview. The humans, calm, utterly logical when faced with overwhelming cosmic stakes, and capable of deploying technology that rendered Cathar mastery moot, had passed through, leaving behind not wreckage, but a terrifyingly clear glimpse of the true darkness that lurked beyond the known light. The hegemony was faced with a choice: continue their insular politics, or acknowledge that the survival of structured reality might now depend on understanding, and perhaps even supporting, the erratic, single-minded movements of the Sol system inhabitants. The quiet fear in the conclave was no longer about human invasion, but about the realization that they had witnessed a force far greater than themselves, a force that had merely used them as a temporary, necessary backdrop for its true journey into the deep, unknown dark. The future was no longer defined by Cathar dominion, but by the silence of a vanishing, fragile battleship, pursuing a signal that promised either ultimate salvation or ultimate oblivion. For all structured existence,